Those who knew her say Makia Coney had an infectious smile and a huge heart. This is the area where the body was located on Wednesday night.
I cannot emphasize enough, anyone who would commit such a crime across from a police substation with a couple hundred police cars, I'm very, very concerned.
Everybody knows kids will be kids.
Parents at University Christian School can't imagine who could be responsible for the brutal murder of 17-year-old Makia Coney. Detectives spent much of the day here talking with students and teachers. You can see their crime scene van, and they looked at every truck in the parking lot.
You good? All right. All right. Now, as far as Makia, you said you had a thing together.
Yeah, I should.
Do you know anybody who would be mad enough to do something as bad as this to her?
No, sir.
Does it bother you what happened?
Yes, sir.
Here we are in a murder investigation of someone who Charles Southern had an on and off again relationship with, and he has virtually no emotional reaction to it. It certainly would raise questions of how could somebody be so calm?
About what time was it that you saw Connor?
Probably around 3:30, over there in the weight room. And he had to work out. So I just hung out with him for a little bit.
Okay. Have you heard anything about what may have happened to me?
I heard Connor walked her to Taco Bell.
Okay, but if he was with you in the weight room, how would he be able to do that without you knowing?
I don't know.
Southern's giving a timeline and a story that doesn't make a lot of sense. He's essentially throwing his friend Connor under the bus. But he doesn't spend much time thinking about is how those two realities can't coexist.
Even though police are suspicious because of his contradictory statements that are being made, it's not enough for them to make an arrest. It's just enough for them to keep watching him and try to find out if there's any validity behind what he's saying.
Okay. Of course, you know what we're here about. It's about Makia's death.
Yes, sir.
Now, what time did you say you saw her?
The only time I've talked to her was like passing in the hallway or something like that, but we're not really close. We don't talk much.
Okay. I'm gonna show you something.
Big trouble.
Very easy to see on film.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? When it comes down to it, Connor, if we can't believe what you tell us, you're in a world of hurt.
He's distancing himself from the crime. He's distancing himself from the victim. Detectives are using their own experience and common sense to realize that either one or both of these suspects, Southern, Pridgeon, maybe both, are somehow either involved in the crime or they know more than they're letting on. And so now they're challenging him. And Pridgeon's got some decisions to make about how far he goes with these lies.
What do you want to tell me, Connor?
I witnessed something.
What did you witness?
Charles accidentally shoot Makia.
Do you know what was going to happen?
So I didn't know. We got out of the car and he ended up coming out with like a 6-shot revolver. I was like waving around in the air. Didn't mean to do anything with it. It was just like playful looking. Like he didn't have his finger on the trigger when he pointed it. And then he was pointing around with Makia the gun went off and he said it was an accident.
How long has she been on the ground before he fired that second shot?
Almost immediately.
If it's an accident, man, it's an accident, okay? You're not gonna stand over her and put one in her head. You're not gonna assassinate the girl for an accident.
She was executed. And you know that, you watched it.
Got probably 4 hours of sleep yesterday.
Teenagers sometimes lie. Their impulse control is poor. But what we also see in psychopathic individuals is this pattern of pathological lying. There's a compulsive need to lie, filling in the blanks. It's clear that Makia was shot twice. She was shot at close range by highly destructive bullets. The only thing Pridgen comes up with is, I only got about 4 hours of sleep. Most of us, if we were in this situation and witnessed something that horrific, might not have slept at all.
I want you to listen to a phone call that just came in.
Charles? Sure. What happened? A friend that was with me, Connor Pridgen. He shot my kid. Connor did? Yes, sir. And you were there? Yes, sir.
Yeah. This is bullshit. And he's supposed to be a good friend of mine, and then he's gonna say and put it all on me, like I did it, I shot her.
Do you think face to face that you could get him to tell the truth?
I'll talk to him face to face, but I think he's just gonna deny it.
The two of them are so rapidly and desperately and impulsively trying to explain away their guilt that they don't really think about the consequences of what they're saying, that they're going to now have to address the fact that they were each there.
Time after time, and lie to you about something even as brutal as a murder.
So that's what you think I am?
The thing that he was most upset about wasn't that they were accusing him of murder, wasn't the fact that he would be going to prison for the rest of his life. It's that the detective probably accurately referred to him as a sociopath. A lot of people will use psychopath and sociopath interchangeably. Impugning his honor is almost the thing that got him most upset.
Charles, Connor, come in. I want you to tell him what you're telling us.
You shot her. I went for the gun. That's it. And you told me when we got back in the truck, if I tell anybody, you were gonna shoot me next.
How would I shoot you if I didn't have a gun? You had the gun, you shot her first, point blank range to the temple.
So the story changes again when the two defendants are in the room together. And you almost get the sense that they're trying to watch each other and see what they should be saying and take cues from one another, but they really fail at that. They can't quite figure out what to say after the one just spoke. And in the end, you know, they're still trying to point fingers at the other one, but there are some slippages. For instance, whenever he stated that he didn't shoot her first. So acknowledging, in fact, that somebody shot her obviously a second time.
You know, they say in the law is you should be able to face your accuser.
Yeah, I didn't shoot her.
That you didn't shoot her, it wasn't an accident.
None of the above.
But you put in the kill shot.
And I put in the kill shot if
The second shot killed
to
her.
that.
The second shot killed her. First shot she could have survived. When it comes to the trophy, Connor, you got it on this one.
I wasn't looking for a trophy.
If that's what you were looking for, partner, if you were looking for recognition, status, that you're a cold killer and you're, you know, a macho guy, you won because you're a cold killer. Charles, look at me. Tell me. I know you want to.
I had the gun pulled back, the hammer. And but I was wanting to scare her, you know, just to mess around. And I didn't know how easy it pulled back.
Was it an accident?
Yes, sir.
He didn't shoot her on accident. He had the gun pointed straight at her head.
Well, why'd you shoot her?
Because I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't know whether she was alive or dead, but I figured she was probably dead, so I just popped the second round. Not even thinking about it.
So the fact that Southern is waving around a loaded firearm, per his account here, and pointing it at a victim, a girl that he dated on and off, just shows how he has no value in human life, and it's rather cold and callous. It's also very telling because Pridgeon then, immediately after she's shot, decides to just shoot her again. Most individuals would check to see if the person would still be alive, especially if they thought it was an accidental shooting. Most individuals wouldn't just shoot the person again. And the way he described it was with zero remorse.
Why Makia?
He had gotten in a fight with her at school. He was already messing around with other girls, but he got mad when she started messing around with other guys.
If these statements are accurate and that was really Southern's impetus for choosing her, it makes it clear that he was really objectifying her, that she was really an object for him, a pawn, you know, for him to use and do what he wanted to when he wanted to. But he expected to be free to date whoever he wanted to.
People with psychopathic traits tend to be more possessive and jealous than others. One, because they have this insatiable need for power and control. The motive for Southern is starting to shape up here, where we understand this is about jealousy and power and control over Makia. He has apparently lost this, and that makes him angry. But why Pridgeon would cooperate and go along with this, that's still unclear.
He said, like, that he wanted to shoot her.
And because of that argument, he wanted to kill her.
He had said, like, he'd always wanted to try it. He said that he wanted to know what it felt like before he went into the Marine Corps.
And how about you?
I mean, I always had it, like, I've always played, like, video games and stuff like that, whereas anything like that, it wasn't really, like, an emotional thing in video game or whatever. But I had never done it in real life. I was curious about it.
Both of them had expressed this desire to kill someone to see what it was like. It's possible, given their shared interest in killing someone, that there was really a synergy between the two of them, and they just fed off of one another.
Everything was like happy. She had no way of knowing. Just like joking around pretty much.
Okay.
He pretty much tried to make it look as like non-suspicious as possible. But the whole time
He's telling detectives how they lured Makia out to this vacant area so they could kill her. So this shows it was very premeditated. They were trying to gain her trust and use their charm to lure her out there. Superficial charm is employed so psychopaths can get their way using honey versus force. And so if they can get somebody to do what they want and get them to come to them and do it with the least amount of resistance, it just makes it easier.
Tell me exactly what really happened, what transpired.
She was facing the creek and talking to Charles, and Charles was standing like almost directly behind her, and he had looked at me and then pulled out a gun that he had in his waistband. She was talking, smoking. As soon as she got to where she turned her head like that, he already had the gun fully extended. Shot her.
Did she never see it?
Never saw it coming. She dropped to the ground. Charles is talking to me.
What did you say?
He asked if I was gonna shoot her, because I guess he thought with me being interested and like the morbid curiosity type thing that I'd want to shoot her or whatever. And we had argued about that for about 5 minutes. Just like, why won't you do it, blah, blah, blah. I finally I pulled the gun straight out of my waistband and shot her from like 6 feet away. I didn't plan on shooting anybody when I went out there. I planned on just watching it go down.
You remember when we've talked every other time, you said it was almost instantaneous.
I had already had the gun in my waistband, which I lied about.
Why are you lying?
It's part of me, like, it's natural instinct.
He's trying to still downplay his culpability while letting his true colors show through. He's admitting that he's just a natural liar. It's what he does over and over.
The idea that Charles had gotten mad at her because she was seeing someone else.
No, it wasn't a motive behind it. It could have been anybody else, to be honest with you. It didn't have to be her, but that was like
she was just
opportunity.
About a week before all this happened, I told Connor one day when we were smoking cigars that I ain't got much money now, and he told me about robbing people. He said, there'd be some things that you gotta do, like shooting people or stuff like that, holding up people. And he asked if I was about that, if I would do it.
Criminal versatility, which means committing multiple different types of crime, and having a juvenile delinquency, which means committing crimes as a young person under the age of 18, both are red flags when it comes to psychopathy.
Southern was asked to leave Missouri after he got in trouble with the law. He relocated to Florida with extended relatives. Once he came to Florida, he ended up in a good crowd. He was on the football team. He was doing well at this private school. He had good family support. But one of the things that we oftentimes find with psychopathic individuals is that they crave a high. They crave stimulation. They get bored very easily. What Southern missed was that thrill-seeking sensation that oftentimes psychopathic individuals get. And so it was only a matter of time before he was going to return to his criminal activity. But he had already done robbing. He needed something more. And killing was the next thing on the list.
And who suggested, of the two of you, that Makia be the target?
It was me, man.
Were you angry at her, or did you see her as an easy target? Someone to shoot?
Yeah, someone to shoot. I wasn't mad at her or anything.
Why? Just to see what it was like?
I felt like, he challenged me. I had to prove myself.
You had to man up?
Yeah, basically called me chicken. Told him I'd take the first shot. So I walked over there and still smoking, Then I walked closer to her, pulled out my gun and shot her. She was stumbling. And I looked over the passenger side, and I seen Connor pull out his gun and shoot her the second time. He said, I didn't think you were going to do it. And we laughed about it.
Say Kimberly Lynn Cates, 42, a nurse and mother, died of wounds to her head, torso, arms, and legs. Daughter Jamie, an 11-year-old sixth grader, remains in intensive care. Her throat cut, a leg broken. There are reports she managed to call 911 after the attack for help.
We just kept saying to ourselves, why that, seemingly unassuming home?
It was like we could go in and torture him, and then we got to the house.
Okay. And if there wasn't anybody home?
It would have just been a robbery. It was almost like an excuse to kill somebody. It was more like a bonus.
New Hampshire state troopers have just arrested 4 individuals suspected for the brutal murder of Kimberly Cates. Her daughter Jamie remains in critical condition. Police were allegedly tipped off from multiple witnesses reporting that 4 teenagers were heard bragging about the murder to friends. The suspects were identified as Stephen Spader, Christopher Gribble, Quinn Glover, and William Marks. All 4 suspects are now in custody of the New Hampshire State Police with charges pending.
I just wanted to be able to record this, and you told me before I turned it on that that was no problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
What do you know about what happened up there in Mount Vernon?
All I know is, like, when there was something about, there was a lady killed in Mount Vernon. And there's, like, a young girl that's in stable condition in the hospital. Which, honestly, I hope she's gonna be okay. Because that's horrible to do something to a little girl. But assuming that somebody specifically tried to kill them, like, that rubs against my conscience personally. I'm one of those type of gentlemanly chivalry sort of guys that you don't even hit girls, let alone go out and treat them badly.
Gribble's reaction to investigators when he's questioned about this brutal crime is inconsistent with how a lot of typical teenage boys and teenagers would react. He's very calm, he's very even in his tone. But what he also is doing is he's impression managing. He's trying to push a narrative on the investigators about how he couldn't possibly be someone that would do this, and that he's this upstanding member of society.
Chris, it's funny you should mention that, because I want to let you know, she is going to survive, fortunately.
That's good.
Why is it you think you're here, sitting with us? What has brought you here to this point?
I don't know. I can't tell you anything but what I think I did.
What you think you did? Don't tell me what you think you did. Tell me what you did. Okay? Be a man and tell me what you did.
We don't do anything on Saturday nights. We just drive around. I didn't do anything. I find it very hard to believe if I didn't do anything, you could really prove that I did something. Since I didn't do it, I'm sorry, this was wasting time.
Individuals, when they want to control the interview or they want to manipulate the person that's interviewing them, they'll dance around the question. It is hypocritical because just a few minutes ago, he said, I'm chivalrous, implying like I would be helpful if I could. But here we see him later in the interview basically not giving up any information, being incredibly vague, insincere, and just all around not helpful.
He's almost challenging them. Prove that you have anything on me, otherwise, I'm walking out of here.
I don't know anything about machete.
I never put a machete in my trunk.
I didn't ask you if you put it in the trunk. I'm asking if you can tell me anything about a machete.
I've seen a machete.
Yeah? Where'd you see it? Don't know anyone who owns one.
My dad used to, but it got lost in the move. When we moved from Utah to here.
You remember Dad having a machete out in Utah, but you still remember that. You can't remember what you did Saturday night.
I thought that was pretty awesome.
I think we all need a break. Is that all right?
Sure.
All right.
What the detective's starting to do is confront him, and some of that is to see if Gribble cracks. He doesn't show any real stress response. He starts to laugh almost sarcastically. This is also where we start to see more and more of those psychopathic traits really emerge. He's not expressing any stress about what they know at all.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you know about the incident out at Mount Vernon? Who were you there with? Steve Spader, and Chris. I get a call or a text from Stevie saying that we're going to go drive next to mine. Did they drive you by the house? Yeah. We were pretty much approaching the house slowly, They wanted to go around in the back, so we did.
what we see is what we would expect to see with most teenagers. He's scared, there's not a lot of energy, and he's somewhat defeated. But what he is also is cooperative. The minute you have a crime partner who's willing to talk, you've got leverage. And most significantly and obviously, what they now have is a witness.
All the lights are still off at this point, so we're just standing around in the dark, and I guess I hear talking. And then so I screamed, and then I heard a bunch of smashing on the bed, and someone saying, "Don't do this, stop." Again, I'm going to ask you, have you heard any more details after the fact? Any of the guys talking about it? They seemed quite amused by it. Who's they? Steve and Chris. They just laughing about it. They seemed to not really care. Afterwards, they said that, I guess they said pretty much it was fun.
You almost hear in Marks's account of this that he's still in disbelief, that his friends really didn't have the same plan in mind. It wasn't about robbing these two people. They wanted to kill. It was maybe indulging in and giving in on a fantasy and an urge that they had both had for some time.
Okay, with that said, we're going to take a break, okay?
You are interested in discussing the matter of this homicide again?
Yes, I am. For the main reason that it was a conspiracy. Steve and I are very similar. Steve and Spader. Both of us grew up with problems in our families. Technically, we're both sociopaths. I do not use that as an excuse. I just thought I'd let you know.
He is saying, I'm not using being a sociopath as an excuse, but he does disclose that he had the bad childhood, which I feel is an excuse or some mitigation. I think that he's also just grandiose, and he wants to show them how smart he is. Look, I have insight into myself. Here's who I am.
What we know about Gribble is in 2007, he had been in trouble for sexually harassing and inappropriately touching someone. And in the process, his family took him to see a therapist. One of the things that emerged was that he was off the scales, high and elevated in the domain that we think of as sociopathy or psychopathy. Oftentimes in media, we hear interchangeably the term psychopath, the term sociopath. And it's important to realize that for us as forensic experts, we talk about it as psychopathy, but they are the same terms.
Steve and I have been friends for a very long time. Well, in the past 3 weeks, we've been kind of desperate for cash, and we ended up robbing the house next to him. However, about a few days ago, we decided that we were still low on cash. We couldn't manage to get jobs, and we were going to try and get another robbery. Saturday morning, when I was with Steve, he told me that him and Billy had been cruising around and had found a house out in Mount Vernon. I had found a machete that my father owned, and Steve had mentioned he liked machetes, so I brought it along.
Did you think that if somebody was there, if they resisted, you were going to kill them, or it was just...
We were just going to kill them. I think Steve enjoys just the butchery part of it, just the power.
Yeah.
I'm more of a precision sort of guy. If I went in there to kill, I'm just going to kill him. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. There's no point to make it worse. It's not in my repertoire. Steve had mentioned that we weren't going to have time to torture, and that we'd do it some other time. So I'm guessing he was into it.
Gribble is almost minimizing his culpability. He's saying, I'm not like that. I'm a better guy. I just kill and I just get it over with. And it almost sounds like he's trying to juxtapose himself with a way worse person, belittling the fact that this was a gruesome, horrific murder.
And if there wasn't anybody home,
it would have just been a robbery. But it was almost like an excuse to kill somebody.
Kind of.
It was more like a bonus. I don't know, I guess me and Steve are pretty messed up people. I'll be perfectly honest, I wanted to kill someone for a long time. It's like an urge, and it was kind of a time that I could get it out. We looked around for a good entry point when we finally found one basement window we thought we could open. And we went in and started looking around. We started to get a little bit relaxed and started talking. That's when they woke up. The mother said something like, "Jamie, is that you?" Steve started hacking at the bed with a machete. But I heard him hit the mom, and so I dove in and stabbed her a few times in the chest. I was controlled, but I didn't really feel much of anything.
What were Quinn and Billy doing?
They stayed by the door. Okay. They didn't do anything. All honesty, we did everything. The girl jumped up and jumped over her mother as Steve was hacking away, and she jumped right into my arms. I stabbed her somewhere around the front right chest area. I tried to twist her around so I could get a better shot at her heart. It was automatic.
He's reliving it, almost like somebody would be feeling joy when they're retelling about a family vacation. He clearly enjoyed this, despite the butchery and just how sadistic and inhumane this was, and yet he's enjoying it. And it's clear as he's telling investigators, I imagine if we could watch him as he's telling it, he'd be smiling.
He turned around, he looked like Jason from Halloween. The mom was obviously not gonna make it, but she was still breathing.
Yeah.
So I went over and stabbed her in the side of the neck to make sure her artery bled out. Put the machete on top of another trash bag, along with the knife, and booked it off.
The fact that Gribble's first thought is to go back to the fantasy of a horror movie really speaks to the fact that these guys do not live in reality. They have really fused what is play acting and made for TV and movies and violence that is contrived for entertainment purposes to that being their script. Their way of navigating the world is this script that they have crafted.
Steve and I went over to Autumn's. It was probably about 5 o'clock to 5:30 when we got back to Autumn's.
Mm-hmm.
Autumn was ready to give us the alibi, and so we crashed at his place.
Mm-hmm.
We got on the online telegraph and looked at it and found out the girl had survived. And they were like, "Wow, Chris, you couldn't even kill a 10-year-old. Gave me a really hard time. I kind of wish she died for her sake. Just because she's gonna have to live with all that now. If I'm gonna kill someone, I'm gonna actually do it so that they don't have to sit and live with a bunch of trauma. I've been through so much trauma, I don't want someone to go through that."
These teenagers can't wait to get home and see whether there's any buzz. They follow the news closely. They start talking to their friends about what they did. And that's where we really start to see the ego and the self-focus that this was a thrill kill. What is important in this explanation he gives the detective is while on the surface it sounds like there's a little empathy for this child victim, he then very skillfully and sadly turns this all back to himself. And that's where we see the narcissism. It's now about his own traumatic experiences, his life as he sees it.
I remember being kind of like, this isn't a normal high, and I was just kind of neutral the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It was awesome because it was like, my system was all in shock.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like, my nerves were running rampant. I had a bunch of adrenaline in my system.
Individuals with psychopathic traits do seek stimulation, and they also may get an adrenaline rush from hurting other people, or, they get a thrill and a rush out of seeking opportunities that benefit them. Had Gribble not gotten caught, there are so many red flags that this would be a repeat offense, that he could engage in this type of behavior again.
But I'll be honest with you, I can't say I was sorry about it. I just felt nothing. It was kind of cool because it was different, but I'm not really sure if I have the conscience anymore.
I knew he was talking about doing a job that night.
What do you mean by a job?
A mission, quote unquote, because he wanted to make his own bike club, and he said this was going to be the initiation mission.
You know the name of the bike club he was starting?
Disciples of Destruction.
Do you know who else was part of Disciples of Destruction?
Quinn and Billy and Steve. Steve was the catalyst to finding things in common. I mean, there really wasn't much to say about Chris up until a few days before the whole Kate's incident.
Marks and Glover were attracted to Spader. They weren't bothered by the idea of doing a home invasion. They weren't concerned about their future, and they had a more antisocial outlook in life. Where Gribble fits into this is that Gribble and Spader went back to childhood. Their families went to church together, but somehow that disturbed thinking of homicidal urges was the nexus that may have bonded Spader with Gribble.
Christopher Gribble and Steven Spader seem to be like-minded in some ways, very interested in looking out for number one, very interested in achieving whatever they want to achieve, however they need to do it, robbing or hurting people if they need to. So it may be, you know, in a sense that individuals with similar psychopathic traits sort of gravitate toward one another.
And shoot myself in the head because I just wanted it to end.
We actually told Dr. Yotanis about a month.
The night Tokyo learned to hold its breath began with a school bag resting neatly beside a vending machine. Its straps folded, as if someone had taken the time to say goodbye. The fluorescent lights humming above an empty sidewalk, coins rattling somewhere inside the metal belly of the city. And a name written in black marker on the inside tag, careful handwriting, teenage, ordinary, the kind of name you'd never expect to become a headline. Never expect to echo for decades. Never expect to be whispered with fear. She was 14 years old, a junior high school student, last seen walking home just after sunset, uniform crisp, shoes still clean, phone battery nearly full, and then nothing. No scream. No struggle caught on camera. No rush of witnesses flooding the street. Just absence, clean and precise, like a door closing softly behind her. By morning, the word missing had already hardened into something heavier. Posters bloomed across station walls and convenience stores. Her face stared out from photocopied sheets, eyes wide, smile polite, the smile of someone who believed the world was predictable. Police tape cut through the neighborhood like a wound, red and white against gray asphalt. Reporters gathered, microphones raised, voices hushed but eager. A Tokyo schoolgirl missing. No ransom. No note. No trace. And almost immediately, another phrase crept into the coverage, the kind that never leaves once it arrives. Cold case. The alley where the bag was found smelled faintly of spilled soda and damp concrete. Officers crouched, gloved hands measuring distance, photographing shadows, collecting fibers so small they might as well have been dust. A single shoe print near the curb, partial, useless. CCTV cameras stared down from poles and shop awnings, unblinking, but somehow blind at the exact moment she passed through. One camera malfunctioned. Another was angled too high. Another recorded over its footage after 48 hours. A city known for order, precision, surveillance, and still, she vanished between frames. Her family's apartment became a shrine overnight. Shoes lined at the door that would not be worn. Dinner left untouched. Her mother answered the same questions again and again, voice thinning with each repetition. What was she wearing? Did she seem upset? Did she mention meeting anyone? While her father stood behind her, silent, fists clenched, staring at the floor as if the answers might be written there. Friends said she was quiet. Teachers said she was punctual. No enemies. No known risks. The kind of profile that terrifies investigators most. Nothing to grab onto. Days stretched. The city moved on, trains running, neon signs blinking, but in that neighborhood time stalled. Volunteers searched riverbanks, parks, construction sites. Police dogs traced her scent to the station entrance, and then lost it completely, swallowed by thousands of overlapping footsteps. A witness came forward, a man who thought he saw a girl arguing with an older woman near a crosswalk, but he wasn't sure, and he hadn't thought it important at the time. Another claimed a white van had idled too long at a red light. White vans were everywhere. Leads piled up and collapsed under their own weight. The first week ended without answers. The second week brought speculation. Tabloids hinted at runaways, secret boyfriends, online predators. Each theory landed like a slap on the family's door. Police denied nothing and confirmed nothing, their statements careful, sterile, designed to calm a public that was beginning to feel watched by the dark. The word abduction appeared in bold print. Then possible homicide. Then silence. Months passed. Evidence degraded. Witnesses forgot details, faces blurred, timelines shifted. A hair found near the bag turned out to belong to a stray cat. Fibers matched a mass-produced coat sold across the city. Phone records showed no suspicious calls. Her last message to a friend was mundane, a complaint about homework, sent minutes before she disappeared. No digital trail leading into the void. It was as if she had stepped sideways out of reality. The case file thickened, then yellowed. Detectives rotated out, promoted, retired. New officers read the reports with fresh eyes, convinced they would see what others had missed, only to circle back to the same dead ends. Every few years, a rumor would flare. A body found in the outskirts, not her. A confession from a drifter, false. A psychic tip discarded. Each time, hope rose and fell, leaving the community a little more hollow. The neighborhood changed. New shops replaced old ones. The vending machine was swapped for a newer model. Children who had been her classmates grew up, moved away, started families of their own. But they remembered the year walking home felt dangerous, the year parents insisted on escorts and earlier curfews, the year innocence cracked. Her name became shorthand for fear, for the warning whispered between adults, for the unspoken rule that no one is ever truly safe. Inside police headquarters, the file was eventually stamped with the label no investigator wants to see. Cold case. Not closed. Not solved. Just waiting. Waiting for a mistake, a memory, a miracle. Waiting for time to loosen a tongue or technology to catch up. Waiting while the city slept. Years later, a junior detective stumbled on the file during a routine archive review. Younger than the case itself, he read it with disbelief, scrolling through scanned photos of the alley, the bag, the uniform neatly folded inside. He noticed something small, almost insulting in its simplicity. A discrepancy in the time stamps between two cameras thought to be unrelated. One camera's clock had been off by 7 minutes. 7 minutes that overlapped with a delivery truck's route. A truck that had never been logged because it technically arrived before the disappearance. A clerical error. A human error. The kind that hides in plain sight. The truck belonged to a local subcontractor, long dissolved. Records were incomplete. Drivers unnamed. But one invoice carried a signature, shaky, hurried, and next to it, a phone number that still rang. An older man answered, confused, defensive. He remembered the route. He remembered the night. He remembered stopping near that alley, because traffic was bad. He did not remember seeing a girl. He said he was alone. His story held. Mostly. Forensic technology had changed since the year she vanished. Old evidence was reprocessed. A smudge on the bag's zipper, once dismissed as handling contamination, now yielded a partial profile. Not enough for a match. Enough to keep the case breathing. The media caught wind of the review. Headlines resurfaced, dragging the past into the present. Tokyo schoolgirl. Cold case reopened. The community felt it again, that old chill crawling up the spine. Then came the call that nobody expected. A woman walked into a suburban police station on a rainy afternoon, umbrella dripping, hands steady, eyes hollow. She asked to speak to someone about a disappearance from many years ago. She said she had information. She said she had carried it too long. The desk officer thought it was another crank until she said the girl's name without being prompted, pronounced it perfectly, and began to cry. Interrogation rooms are designed to be forgettable. Neutral colors. No clocks. No windows. But the air in that room thickened as she spoke. She described a night, an argument, a moment of anger that spun out of control. She knew details that had never been released, the position of the bag, the sound of the vending machine, the way the streetlight flickered. Detectives exchanged glances, pens freezing mid-note. A confession, arriving years late, heavy with specificity, the kind that makes your pulse quicken and your stomach drop at the same time. But confessions are not endings. They are beginnings with teeth. As she talked, gaps emerged. Timelines wavered. Motives blurred. She claimed an accident. Evidence suggested otherwise. She named another person, then retracted it. She said she had acted alone, then hinted she hadn't. Each answer opened 2 more questions. The DNA did not match her. Not yet. Not completely. The truth hovered just out of reach, close enough to cast a shadow, far enough to keep running. Outside, rain streaked the pavement, washing over streets that had held their secret for so long. Cameras gathered again. Voices lowered. The words "shocking confession" lit up screens, but inside the station, no one dared to say solved. Because the girl was still missing. Because a story told late can still be a lie. Because some mysteries don't end cleanly, they fracture. And somewhere between that vending machine and the interrogation room, between the night she vanished and the day someone finally spoke, the case tightened its grip again. No longer frozen, no longer quiet, breathing just enough to remind the city that the past is never really past. And some questions, once asked, refused to stay buried. The confession did not bring sleep back to the city. It stole what little rest remained. In newsrooms, editors argued over verbs, claims, admits, alleges, while the rain-stained footage looped endlessly. The woman's silhouette entering the station replayed until it lost meaning, until it became a symbol rather than a person. And symbols are dangerous because they invite belief before proof. Detectives returned to the alley with different eyes, not to look for what had been missed, but to test what had been said, replaying her words against the geometry of concrete and light, counting steps, measuring angles, listening to the city's noise at that hour, trains sighing, vending machines coughing coins, the low tide of traffic that never quite empties Tokyo's veins. They timed the flicker of the streetlight she mentioned, discovered maintenance logs that confirmed a fault that night, a surge that caused the lamp to blink twice in quick succession, a detail that tightened jaws and quickened pulses, because it was real, because it meant she had been there. Or someone had told her, or she had studied the case deeply enough to mimic reality. Truth and imitation sat side by side, indistinguishable at a glance. Investigators pulled the old photos again, the school bag's scuffed corner, the zipper teeth bent at an odd angle, the way the straps lay parallel rather than tangled, order where chaos was expected. Order can be staged. Order can also be the residue of control. Her name, the woman's, began to leak despite attempts to contain it, and with it came a history that was both ordinary and unsettling. Divorced, middle-aged, lived alone for years in a quiet suburb where neighbors waved, but did not visit. Worked irregular jobs, cleaning offices at night, delivery work during the day. No criminal record. No obvious connection to the girl, at least not one that surfaced in databases. They searched school records, employment rosters, volunteer lists, PTA meetings, anything that might have placed them in the same orbit. Nothing aligned cleanly. Threads brushed past one another without knotting. In the interrogation room, the woman's voice wavered as fatigue replaced adrenaline. She spoke of resentment she could not fully explain, of a moment that spiraled, of grabbing a sleeve too hard, of fear flooding her chest. She insisted she hadn't planned it. She insisted she'd panicked. She insisted she'd tried to help afterward. Each insistence landed softer than the last, worn down by repetition. When asked where the girl was now, she paused long enough for the room to feel its own heartbeat, then said she didn't know, that she had left her somewhere safe, that someone else must have taken her. The words drifted like smoke, offering shape without substance. Detectives separated fact from fog. They drove her claimed routes, timed her steps, compared transit logs. Her account placed her at 2 places at once unless a shortcut existed, unless a door she mentioned actually opened onto a back stairwell. It did. The building's superintendent, long retired, remembered complaints about noise, remembered a woman who cleaned late, remembered a girl once, maybe, waiting in the lobby. Memory bent under pressure, but it bent toward possibility. Forensics returned to the bag again, and again to the smudge on the zipper. Partial profiles are like half-heard whispers, enough to haunt, never enough to convict. New techniques teased out a few more markers. The profile shifted closer to something human, closer to something searchable. A familial database search produced a weak signal, distant, a fourth cousin twice removed, a name that meant nothing until it did. That family tree branched into the same suburb where the woman lived. Coincidence, maybe? Or gravity? The media shifted tone. Where once there had been certainty, now there was caution. Headlines hedged. Panels debated false confessions, the psychology of guilt, the hunger for closure. Survivors of other cases spoke up, warning against hope. But in the neighborhood, candles appeared again, small flames cupped against the wind, and people who had not spoken in years exchanged looks heavy with the same question. If not her, then who? If her, then where? Police knocked on doors they had already knocked on decades earlier. Some opened reluctantly. Others did not open at all. One man, older now, recognized a photo and flinched. He had been a delivery driver, he said, not the one they were looking for, but another, a temp who worked a few nights and then disappeared from the roster. He remembered a white van that wasn't white anymore, repainted hastily, the smell of solvent lingering for days. He had forgotten the detail because forgetting was easier. Names came back slowly, like ghosts coaxed by the living. The suspect list grew. Alibis frayed. A retired clerk admitted to altering logs under pressure to keep schedules clean. A shop owner recalled a scream that he dismissed as laughter because laughter was safer. Each confession was small, insufficient alone, but together they formed a rough map of negligence, of human choices that cleared a path for something terrible to pass through unnoticed. The woman's lawyer pushed back, painting her client as fragile, suggestible, overwhelmed by decades of guilt for something she did not do. Experts were brought in to assess her mental state. She failed to produce details when pressed on specifics that mattered most: distances, weights, sequences. Her story shifted in tone, if not in outline. It was compelling in its emotion, unstable in its mechanics. The room grew colder as certainty receded. Then a second call came, quieter, easier to miss. An anonymous tip, routed through a payphone, a voice altered by fear or technology, claiming knowledge of a place where something had been buried long ago, near water but not of it, beneath concrete poured hurriedly, where weeds never quite took. The caller refused to meet, refused to name names, but provided coordinates that intersected with an industrial redevelopment zone scheduled for demolition. Time, again, pressed its thumb to the scale. Excavators paused. The ground was marked. Workers stood back as investigators took over, the hum of the city replaced by the scrape of tools and the careful choreography of a search. Hours passed. Nothing. Then a change in soil color. A smell that should not have been there. A fragment of fabric, faded but recognizable. School uniform blue dulled by earth. Breath caught. Cameras zoomed. Hands trembled. What they found was not her. Too small. Too old. A different tragedy folded into the same patch of ground. Another story that had waited its turn. The crowd's hope collapsed inward, sharp and private. The anonymous voice never called again. The woman in custody wept when told, a sound that split the air and then dissolved into it. Night fell, and with it came the familiar ache. The case had moved undeniably, but not forward in a straight line. It spiraled, widening the circle of the lost. Files multiplied. Questions metastasized. The confession that promised an ending had delivered only a deeper middle, a place where the truth hid behind mirrors, and the past refused to choose a single face. Back at the alley, the vending machine hummed as it always had, stocked and restocked, indifferent. A junior officer stood there longer than necessary, imagining the last ordinary seconds before everything broke, imagining how many eyes had been near enough to see and far enough to look away. In the quiet, the city seemed to lean in, listening to itself, aware now that a cold case warmed not with answers, but with friction, heat generated by doubt, by memory, by the terrible knowledge that someone somewhere still knew more than they were saying, and that knowledge, like the girl herself, remained just out of reach, suspended between accusation and proof, between confession and silence, between the comfort of belief and the terror of not knowing. By the time the excavation tape came down and the machines roared back to life, the case had learned a new way to hurt. Not with silence, but with noise. Everyone talked now. Former classmates, retired officers, anonymous accounts online claiming proximity, claiming certainty, claiming dreams that felt like memories. The reopened cold case had turned porous, leaking emotion into every crack of the city, and investigators were forced to work inside the echo chamber, separating what was newly said from what had always been true. The woman's confession was no longer the center of gravity. It was a question mark that bent everything around it. Prosecutors hesitated. Detectives pushed. Psychologists argued over the anatomy of delayed guilt. In a windowless room, audio of her interviews played on a loop, analysts marking hesitations, overlaps, changes in pitch when she said the girl's name. She cried easily when speaking of herself, less so when pressed about the moment of loss. Empathy, some said, had limits. Performance, others warned, can look the same as pain. They pulled financial records from the year of the disappearance, combing through transactions like archaeologists brushing sand from bone. The woman's accounts showed nothing unusual. Small purchases, utilities paid late, a life lived close to the margin. But another name surfaced repeatedly in the margins of the subcontractor logs. A man paid in cash, inconsistent hours, initials that matched nothing in the official registry. The delivery truck route intersected with a service corridor that ran behind the alley, a narrow strip where city maps grew vague. Urban blind spots have their own logic, designed by convenience and ignored by habit. A retired traffic officer remembered the corridor. He remembered rerouting cars there during a construction surge the week after the girl vanished, remembered a temporary barrier installed without paperwork, remembered a smell he'd joked about at the time, fresh concrete curing too fast in the heat. He had no proof now, just the memory. Memory is a poor witness, but it is often the only one left. Ground-penetrating radar rolled over the corridor in slow, deliberate lines. The screen bloomed with static, then resolved into shapes that suggested disturbance, layering that didn't match municipal records. The city granted permission to drill. The first core came up clean. The second, too. On the third, the bit shuddered. Resistance. The team paused, recalibrated, drilled again. What emerged was concrete over older concrete, a hurried patch over something meant to stay buried. The air shifted. This time, the cameras were closer. They found remnants of a crate, splintered, waterlogged, metal fasteners corroded beyond recognition. Inside, personal effects that had no place being there, a ribbon frayed, a button that matched the uniform pattern from a discontinued supplier, a phone charm popular the year she disappeared. Each item carried weight disproportionate to its size. Each one said presence without saying fate. The remains were not there. Not yet. Or not anymore. The woman was shown the photos. She closed her eyes before the first image appeared, as if she'd already seen it. When asked to identify the items, she hesitated, then named the ribbon incorrectly. A small error. A telling one. Her lawyer objected. The interview ended. Outside, rain returned, patient and relentless. Attention shifted to the initials. Investigators cross-referenced cash payments with traffic camera anomalies, fuel receipts, toll logs. A pattern emerged, incomplete but suggestive, orbiting a man who had never been interviewed because he had never officially existed. A ghost worker, moving between companies, paid to disappear when the job ended. He'd left the city shortly after the case went cold. Left behind debts. Left behind a trail that only technology, years later, could see. They found him 3 prefectures away, older, heavier, quieter. He denied knowing the girl. Denied the corridor. Denied the crate. His hands shook when shown the ribbon, not enough to be dramatic, just enough to be human. He agreed to a voluntary interview, then asked for a break he never took, then asked for a lawyer. His alibi for the night in question rested on a woman who had died 5 years earlier. Dead alibis don't argue back. The community watched the developments with the brittle hope of people who had learned to ration belief. Candlelight vigils flared and faded. Comment sections turned cruel. Some insisted the woman had confessed, and that was enough. Others insisted the city was inventing a monster to cover its own failures. The family said nothing publicly. Grief, after decades, becomes private property. In the lab, the partial DNA profile tightened again. New markers aligned with a family line that included the ghost worker. Not a match. Close enough to feel like one. A warrant followed. Samples were taken. The weight stretched, elastic and cruel. When the results came back, they landed with a thud that rattled the room. Inconclusive. Degraded. Time had done what time does best. The woman, sensing the shift, altered her story. Not the core, never the core, but the edges. She now remembered a man nearby. She remembered the sound of a truck door. She remembered being afraid of him. It was a convenient remembering, arriving precisely when she needed it. Detectives noted it without comment. The truth does not need revision. Lies do. They returned to the corridor at night, lights off, recreating the conditions as they had been described, measuring sound bleed, sight lines, the way shadows pooled under the overpass. A train thundered by overhead, masking everything beneath it for exactly 42 seconds. Enough time to move a crate. Enough time to miss a scream. Enough time to create a hole in history. A junior tech flagged an old environmental report from the redevelopment archive, a footnote about soil contamination that had forced a brief halt years ago. The report included photographs taken by a contractor on a cheap digital camera, images stored on a server no one had accessed since. In one frame, barely visible at the edge, a familiar vending machine reflected a shape that did not belong to the street. A school bag, or something like it. The timestamp placed it days after the official discovery. Days after it should have been gone. The implication rippled outward. The bag may have been moved, staged, returned. The alley was not the beginning. It was a punctuation mark. Detectives recalibrated the timeline, peeling back assumptions they had carried for decades. The city felt smaller as the circle tightened. When confronted with the photo, the woman said nothing. Not denial, not explanation, just silence, heavy and deliberate. Her lawyer ended the session. The ghost worker refused further contact. The file thickened again, but this time with pages that talked to each other, references cross-linked, margins annotated in red. At dawn, as officers filed out into the pale light, the vending machine hummed and dispensed a can for a passerby who did not know why the place felt wrong, only that it did. Somewhere between the corridor and the alley, between a confession that cracked and evidence that whispered, the case leaned forward, no longer frozen, no longer content to sleep. It had learned how to move through time, dragging the city with it, reminding everyone that a cold case does not thaw all at once. It breaks in shards, sharp and unpredictable, and every step toward the truth risks cutting the hands that reach for it. The shards cut deeper once they started to move. With every new fragment unearthed, the case shed another layer of protection, and what lay beneath was not clarity, but exposure. Investigators stopped thinking in straight lines and began thinking like the city itself, overlapping routes, hidden passages, systems built to function even when parts failed. They mapped not just streets but habits, not just timelines but tolerances, the places where people learned to look away because looking was inconvenient. Attention returned to the school bag, the object that had anchored the story from the beginning and quietly misled it. For years it had been treated as an endpoint, the place where everything stopped. Now it was reclassified as a prop. Lab technicians examined it again, this time not for what it carried, but for how it had been handled. Microabrasions along the base suggested it had been dragged across rough concrete more than once. The dirt embedded in the seams contained mineral traces inconsistent with the alley, a blend more common near industrial runoff zones closer to the bay. The bag had traveled. The bag had a history. Traffic analysts rebuilt the night minute by minute using models that didn't exist when the case first went cold. They fed in weather data, signal timings, train schedules, even vending machine restock logs, and watched probability maps bloom and collapse on their screens. A cluster formed near the service corridor, tightened around a loading bay that had since been sealed behind a new facade. The building's renovation plans showed an unrecorded access hatch, bricked over during a rush to meet deadlines. Dead space, preserved by neglect. Inside that space, they found nothing dramatic. No remains, no blood, just scuffed paint and a faint indentation in the floor where something heavy had rested long enough to leave a memory. Sometimes absence is the loudest evidence there is. The indentation matched the crate fragments found earlier. The crate had been there. The girl had been there. And then she hadn't. The ghost worker's name, if it was his real name, surfaced in another context. A decade earlier, he'd been questioned in connection with a different disappearance. Another young person lost near a transit hub. Another case that cooled before it could boil. No charges. No follow-up. Patterns are easy to see in hindsight, dangerous to assert in court. Still, the file was pulled. 2 dots do not make a line, but they invite a third. The woman in custody sensed the ground shifting again. Her health declined abruptly. Panic attacks. Chest pain. She was moved to a hospital ward under guard. From the bed, she asked to speak, not to police, but to the family. The request was denied. Boundaries matter when emotions spike. She cried anyway, telling a nurse she had wanted to be forgiven before she died, that she had wanted to set things right. The nurse listened and said nothing. Listening is not agreement. Public pressure intensified. A talk show aired a reenactment, so stylized it bordered on spectacle. Online forums identified suspects, then destroyed them, then moved on. A former teacher received threats after someone misread an attendance sheet posted out of context. The city's appetite for resolution sharpened into something dangerous, something that could devour the truth if it got in the way. Behind the scenes, prosecutors argued strategy. Without remains, without a clean match, without a confession that held under pressure, any case would be fragile. They needed corroboration that did not rely on memory. They needed a machine to speak where people could not. A forgotten server from the Transit Authority provided an opening. It housed raw data from experimental sensors installed briefly and then abandoned, a failed pilot program that logged vibrations and magnetic disturbances to optimize maintenance. No one had thought to check it because no one remembered it existed. The data was messy, incomplete, but on the night in question it recorded a sequence of anomalies near the service corridor. A prolonged vibration consistent with heavy loading, a magnetic spike consistent with a vehicle door repeatedly opened and closed, then nothing. A gap. A power drop. When systems fail, they leave signatures. The signatures matched the 42-second window beneath the train. Investigators brought the ghost worker back in, this time with charts instead of photos. He stared at the lines, as if they might accuse him out loud. His breathing changed when the vibration spike appeared. He said he couldn't read graphs. He said he'd already told them everything. He asked for water. The room waited. When the silence stretched too long, he spoke, not to them but to the table, saying he'd only been paid to move things, that he didn't ask questions, that the crate was sealed, that he thought it was equipment. Thought is a shield people raise when intention threatens to show. He named another person then, a supervisor who had since died, a convenient dead end that could not deny him. He described a handoff that didn't appear in any log, cash passed through gloves, instructions delivered without words. He said he never looked inside. He said he drove away and never came back. The statement was signed, qualified, lawyered into something thin and slippery. The family was briefed in private. They listened without interruption, faces composed in the way grief teaches you to be composed. When asked if they wanted to make a statement, they declined. They had lived too long with noise. Silence was theirs. At the hospital, the woman watched coverage on a muted television. She saw the charts flash, the blurred images of the corridor, the phrase "new evidence" crawl along the bottom of the screen. Her lips moved as if counting. That night, she tried to leave the ward. She was stopped at the door, hands shaking, eyes wild. She said she needed air. She said she needed to finish it. The words meant everything and nothing. Investigators returned to the bay at low tide, extending the search outward, into drainage channels and retention basins mapped, but rarely seen. In one channel, beneath silt and debris, they found a fragment of plastic, aged and brittle, stamped with a manufacturer's mark that traced back to the same crate supplier. The channel led toward the water, but not into it. It led to a place where things were temporarily held, forgotten by design. Night settled again, and with it came the sense that the case was no longer chasing a single truth, but circling a system, a network of small decisions that had allowed something unforgivable to pass through without resistance. Somewhere in that system, a final hinge waited, something that would swing the story one way or the other. As officers packed up, one of them noticed a chalk mark on the concrete near the sealed hatch, faint, half erased by time, the kind contractors used to signal alignment. Next to it, a date, scrawled quickly, illegible except for the year. The year she vanished. The mark had been sealed, built over, ignored. It had waited. Like everything else. The city exhaled, slow and uneasy. The case did not offer comfort. It offered momentum. And momentum, once gained, does not ask permission. It carries everything with it. Confessions that crumble, evidence that whispers, and the growing, unbearable sense that the truth was no longer hiding in the dark, but moving in plain sight, daring someone to finally follow it all the way to where it ended. Momentum changed the way everyone moved. Detectives stopped asking what had happened and started asking how it had been allowed to happen, and that shift turned the investigation outward, away from individual guilt and toward collective failure. The chalk mark by the sealed hatch became a focal point, photographed, enhanced, compared against construction records that had been digitized sloppily, if at all. The date was confirmed. The hatch had been sealed within days of the disappearance, signed off by a supervisor whose name appeared nowhere else in the file because it had never been relevant, until now. They traced the supervisor's career, a neat progression through projects that prized speed over scrutiny, a man praised for meeting deadlines and smoothing problems before they reached the surface. He was still alive, living on the city's edge, gardening, volunteering, respected. When officers knocked, he invited them in, served tea, smiled the way people smile when they believe they have nothing to hide. He recognized the corridor immediately. He remembered the pressure. He remembered approving the patch. He did not remember why. Memory fails in predictable ways. It protects the self. Investigators showed him the chalk mark, the crate fragments, the vibration charts. His smile thinned. He admitted there had been a rush job, an instruction from above to close the access and move on. He admitted he hadn't asked questions, because asking questions costs time. When asked who gave the instruction, he paused, then named a department that no longer existed, absorbed into another during a reorganization that scattered responsibility like ash. Systems again. Always systems. The ghost worker's statement was revisited line by line. Analysts mapped his words against the physical space, aligning verbs with distances, pauses with obstacles. His claim that he never opened the crate rang hollow now that the indentation in the bay floor had been measured and matched to a crate size that required inspection for safe handling. He would have known the weight. He would have felt the imbalance. Knowledge leaves fingerprints even when hands are clean. A warrant opened his storage unit, untouched for years, dust thick enough to write names in. Inside, they found tools wrapped in oilcloth, old work boots, and a box of personal effects that did not belong to him. A hair clip shaped like a star, the kind sold in school supply shops that year, snapped in half. It wasn't proof. It was proximity. Proximity has gravity. The woman was discharged from the hospital under guard, weaker but sharper, eyes tracking every movement. In a new interview room, she asked if they had found the place yet. The question landed hard. When pressed, she said she had dreamed of concrete and water, of echoes under trains. Dreams again. She offered to show them. Offers are bargaining chips dressed as help. They drove her through the city at night, windows up, lights low. She directed them toward the corridor without hesitation, pointing before landmarks appeared. At the sealed hatch, she closed her eyes and said it was louder than she remembered. The trains, the way sound swallowed everything else. She said she hadn't meant for anyone else to get involved. She said she thought it would be over quickly. The words fell apart as soon as they landed. No one asked follow-up questions. They had learned the cost of letting her lead. Divers were brought in to search retention basins connected to the drainage channel. The water was opaque, cold, heavy with sediment. They moved slowly, hands reading the dark. What they found were not answers but reminders. Debris from decades of neglect, objects lost and never missed. At the far end, beneath a collapsed grate, a piece of fabric snagged, blue dulled to grey. It matched the uniform supplier. It did not match the girl's size. Another story, intersecting and diverging, a city layered with unfinished endings. Public patience thinned into anger. Demonstrations formed near the corridor, signs demanding justice, others demanding names. Police presence increased. Rumors multiplied. Someone leaked the ghost worker's identity. His house was vandalized. He moved to a hotel under protection, his statements hardening as fear set in. Fear makes people precise about the wrong things. In the lab, a breakthrough arrived quietly. The plastic fragment from the channel was tested again with a newer method, one that read manufacturing micro-variations like tree rings. It placed the fragment within a narrow production window, weeks before the disappearance, and tied it to a batch delivered exclusively to a single contractor. The supervisor's contractor. The circle tightened, not around a person, but around a decision. Prosecutors prepared charges related to obstruction, falsification of records, negligence. Not the ending anyone wanted, but a beginning the law could recognize. The family was informed. They listened. They asked one question: would it bring her back? The answer was no. The meeting ended there. Late one evening, a call came from the hotel. The ghost worker had asked to speak again. No lawyer this time. He said he was tired. He said he couldn't sleep. He said he had moved the crate twice, not once, because the first place felt wrong, because he had been told to wait, because waiting made him think. Thinking is what people blame when they can no longer deny intention. He described a temporary holding space near the bay, a place used briefly during storms, then abandoned. He gave directions that didn't exist on maps anymore. The site was found at dawn, half collapsed, fenced off by rust and weeds. Inside, beneath a layer of silt and trash, they found bones. Small. Human. The room went quiet in the way that changes people. Forensics moved in with practiced care. The city held its breath again, older now, less hopeful, but still listening. Identification would take time. Everyone knew that. Time had become the case's primary antagonist. As officers stood back, the woman watched from a distance, face unreadable. She did not cry. She did not speak. She counted trains as they passed overhead, lips moving, 1, 2, 3, as if numbers could still impose order. When the sun rose fully, it illuminated the corridor, the hatch, the chalk mark, the bay, all the places that had kept their secrets by being useful. The cold case had warmed to the touch, not with relief, but with consequence. Someone would be charged. Systems would be named. But the cost would remain, etched into concrete and memory, a reminder that truth, when it finally surfaces, does not arrive clean. It arrives late, dragging everything it touches into the light, and even then, it leaves behind questions that no excavation, no confession, no verdict can ever completely answer. Identification did not come with sirens or headlines. It came with paperwork, sealed envelopes, and a phone call placed in a room where no one spoke above a whisper. Dental records matched. Bone growth aligned. The uniform fragment, the ribbon, the charm, pieces scattered across years, finally converged into a single, devastating certainty. She had been there. She had been moved. And she had not survived. The city absorbed the news the way it absorbs earthquakes. A brief shudder, then 1,000 quiet aftershocks that rippled through kitchens, offices, classrooms, places where people paused and thought about the last time they'd seen someone they loved. The family received the confirmation privately. No cameras. No statements. Grief, when it completes a circle, does not need witnesses. Investigators stood outside the room, listening to nothing, understanding everything. Closure is a word used by people who have never had to close anything like this. With identification came urgency. Charges were drafted and redrafted, language sharpened to survive scrutiny. The ghost worker was arrested on suspicion of unlawful disposal of a body, obstruction, and conspiracy. He did not resist. In custody, his voice lost its edge and gained detail. He described the crate more clearly now, admitted it had been heavier than equipment should be, admitted he'd known there was a person inside before he told himself he didn't. He admitted he'd been paid extra not to ask questions. That extra money had felt like permission. Permission is how systems recruit accomplices without ever naming them. The supervisor was charged with falsification and negligence resulting in death. He cried when told. He said he had never seen the girl. He said he had never touched her. Both were true. Neither mattered. The law is not interested in hands alone. It is interested in hinges, in who opened doors and who closed them afterward. The woman's position collapsed fastest. Confronted with the identification, the location, the corroborated movements, she stopped revising and started retreating. Her lawyer advised silence. Silence can be a strategy, but it can also be a confession that refuses to speak. Prosecutors weighed whether to pursue homicide charges or let the case anchor itself in the stronger chain of facilitation and concealment. The calculus was brutal and precise. Emotion was not invited. In court filings, timelines hardened into facts. The alley was no longer the beginning. The bag was no longer the ending. The service corridor, the bay, the holding space, all aligned into a route, a choreography of avoidance that required more than one person and less than a conspiracy. The city read these filings the way it reads weather warnings, scanning for what applies to them, for how to stay dry. Outside the courthouse, demonstrators gathered again, this time quieter. Candles burned in daylight. Names were spoken carefully. Some demanded maximum sentences. Others demanded apologies from institutions that do not apologize. The family did not attend. They had already paid enough to watch. During a pre-trial hearing, the ghost worker testified. He spoke of fear, of poverty, of being invisible. He spoke of the sound under the train, the way it erased everything else. He spoke of moving the crate a second time, because the first place felt watched, because someone had told him to wait for instructions that never came. He spoke until his voice broke, then kept speaking. The room listened. Listening does not equal forgiveness. A forensic animation played on a screen, reconstructing movements with cold precision. It showed how long 42 seconds really is. How much can happen when noise becomes cover. How easily a life can be misfiled as a problem to be solved later. Later had arrived. The woman was brought in briefly, not to testify, but to be present. She watched the animation without blinking. When it ended, She asked if the sound could be turned off. It could not. Some sounds linger, even when muted. As the trial dates were set, the city's attention wavered. Other news intruded. Time asserted itself again. But the case had changed the texture of things. Parents walked a little closer to their children. Contractors double-checked logs. Supervisors asked questions they used to skip. These were not reforms, they were flinches. On the anniversary of the disappearance, a small memorial appeared near the vending machine. No official sanction. Just flowers, notes, a photograph laminated against rain. Passers-by slowed. Some bowed. Some looked away. The machine hummed, indifferent as ever, dispensing cans into waiting hands. Inside the courthouse, arguments sharpened. Defense teams attacked chains of custody, questioned memory, challenged inferences. Prosecutors leaned on systems, on patterns, on the weight of small truths aligned. The judge listened, impassive, the law a narrow bridge over a deep well. At night, detectives dreamed of corridors, of doors that sealed themselves, of chalk marks that refused to fade. Dreams are the mind's way of finishing work the day cannot. The cold case, no longer cold, did not warm into comfort. It burned. It burned through reputations and routines, through the illusion that order prevents harm. It burned until only essentials remained. What was done, who allowed it, who looked away, and who paid the price. And even as the machinery of justice turned, slow, deliberate, grinding, the city understood something it had avoided for years. This was not a story about a monster hiding in the dark. It was a story about light redirected, about sound used as cover, about ordinary decisions stacked until they crushed someone small enough to be moved, sealed, and forgotten. Forgotten, that is, until a cold case refused to stay cold, until momentum carried it forward, not toward peace, but toward a reckoning that would leave scars where certainty used to be, and a silence afterward that would never again feel empty. The reckoning did not arrive all at once. It seeped in through procedures and protocols, through motions filed and objections sustained, through the slow recalibration of a city that had to learn how to live with what it now knew. Courtrooms filled and emptied. Names were spoken into microphones and recorded forever. The ghost worker sat smaller each day, shoulders collapsing inward as if gravity had increased just for him. When asked why he hadn't gone to the police years ago, he said he thought it was too late even then. That time had already hardened around the mistake, that breaking it would only cut him. Time, it turned out, cuts everyone eventually. The supervisor's defense leaned on intent, or the absence of it. He had followed procedure as he understood it. He had trusted the system above him. He had not imagined a child on the other side of his signature. The prosecution did not argue imagination. It argued consequence. In the diagrams projected on the wall, arrows showed how a single approval cascaded into a sealed hatch, how a sealed hatch became a hidden space, how a hidden space became a grave. The arrows did not accuse, they demonstrated. The woman's case stalled in a different way. Her earlier confession, now riddled with contradictions, became a liability rather than a weapon. Prosecutors debated whether to proceed, knowing a failed case could poison the others. Her lawyer pressed for dismissal, citing mental health, coercion, contamination by media. Experts testified about suggestibility, about guilt that attaches itself to stories until it feels like memory. The judge listened, pen hovering, the law balancing on a narrow edge. Outside, the city's patience thinned again, this time into exhaustion. People wanted an ending they could digest, a sentence they could underline and move past. Instead, they got continuances. They got sealed exhibits. They got days where nothing seemed to happen at all. Justice, like construction, rarely looks impressive from the street. In a quiet office far from the courtroom, a data analyst revisited the abandoned transit server one more time, not because anyone asked, but because the anomalies still bothered him. He ran a different filter, one designed to isolate patterns across weeks instead of nights. A rhythm emerged, faint but persistent. Similar vibration signatures on 3 other dates, months apart, always near transit hubs, always during maintenance windows. The signatures did not prove anything. They suggested repetition. The analyst flagged the pattern. Detectives groaned and then leaned in. The other dates corresponded to unresolved incidents, cases dismissed as accidents or misplacements, incidents that never became headlines. The city's map filled with small, dark stars. Not a spree. Not a plan. A tolerance. A learned behavior that noise could cover, that paperwork could erase, that time would forgive. Prosecutors faced a choice. expand and risk collapse, or narrow and secure convictions where they could. They chose narrow. The law prefers clean lines. History does not. The verdicts, when they came, were precise and unsatisfying. The ghost worker was convicted on multiple counts, sentenced to years that sounded long until measured against decades. The supervisor received a sentence that acknowledged harm without equating it to intent. Appeals were filed before the ink dried. The woman's charges were deferred, pending further evaluation, her story suspended in a legal limbo that felt like mercy to some and betrayal to others. The family attended none of it. They held a private ceremony instead, near water, releasing a ribbon into the current, watching it disappear without pretending that disappearance was healing. Reporters respected the boundary. For once. At the alley, the vending machine was replaced again, this time with a model that took cards instead of coins. The hum changed pitch. The sound under the train remained the same. Someone painted over the faint chalk mark during routine maintenance, erasing it with bureaucratic efficiency. Erasure does not equal forgetting. Sometimes it does the opposite. In classrooms, teachers told students about safety in ways they hadn't before. In offices, managers added checklists. In corridors, doors were left open a second longer. These were not reforms. They were rituals, small acts meant to appease a sense of fragility newly acknowledged. Late one night, the analyst walked the service corridor alone, listening. He counted seconds between trains. 42, again and again. He imagined how much could be done in that time, how much had been. He imagined how many people had heard the noise and thought nothing of it. He imagined himself doing the same. The case receded from the front pages, replaced by newer shocks, fresher mysteries. But it did not leave. It embedded. It altered the background hum of the city, a frequency only some could hear, a reminder that systems do not fail loudly. They fail politely, efficiently, with stamps and signatures and plausible deniability. In a holding cell, the ghost worker stared at his hands and tried to remember when they had stopped being his. In a suburban house, the supervisor tended his garden, pulling weeds that returned no matter how often he cleared them. In a hospital ward, the woman watched trains pass on a distant screen, soundless, counting without knowing why. The cold case had delivered its verdicts, but not its absolution. It had exposed a shape beneath the story, something larger than any one person, something that did not fit neatly into charges or sentences. It had shown how a city could lose someone without noticing, how it could find her years later and still not know what to do with what it had learned. As the seasons turned, the memorial near the alley thinned. Notes faded. Flowers dried. The photograph curled at the edges. A passerby straightened it once, then walked on. Life continued, as it always does, carrying lessons unevenly, dropping some, clinging to others. And beneath the trains, beneath the concrete, beneath the routines that smoothed the city's face, the sound remained, a reminder of 42 seconds, of choices made and unmade, of a cold case that warmed just enough to reveal the truth and then cooled again. Leaving behind a different kind of chill, the knowledge that what happened once could happen again, not because of monsters, but because of ordinary people trusting systems that never learned how to listen. Time did what it always does after verdicts. It thinned the air. The courthouse steps emptied. The vans moved on. Microphones found new mouths. What remained was quieter and more dangerous. Interpretation. People argued not about what happened, but about what it meant, and meaning is harder to contain than facts. In editorial columns and late-night conversations, the case became a mirror, reflecting whatever fear the speaker already carried. Inside the police department, the after-action reviews began. Charts on walls, bullet points on screens, lessons learned, risks identified, procedures revised. The language was bloodless by design. No one wrote the girl's name in those documents. Systems prefer abstraction. It makes guilt manageable. But in the margins, officers scribbled notes anyway, about corridors, about noise, about the cost of assuming someone else is responsible. A box of evidence was returned to storage, relabeled, its contents now officially resolved. The school bag, cleaned and catalogued, sat under fluorescent lights that never slept. A junior clerk paused before sealing it, fingers hovering over the latch, then closed it with a click that sounded too loud in the room. Closure is a sound people imagine. In reality, it's just another click. The analyst's pattern report was archived with a cautionary note, insufficient to generalize. He read the note twice, then once more, and felt something tighten in his chest. Insufficient to generalize meant sufficient to suspect. Suspicion, without mandate, becomes a private burden. He kept walking the corridors at night. Not officially, just listening, counting, measuring the way sound bent around corners. He told himself he was done. He wasn't. The woman was transferred to a long-term facility. Evaluations continued. Diagnoses multiplied. Her confession became a case study, cited in seminars about false memory and delayed guilt. Students debated her words without hearing her voice. In the facility's common room, she watched trains on a small television mounted high on the wall, the image grainy, the sound off. She counted anyway. Habits outlive reasons. The ghost worker began his sentence in a place designed to compress time. Days repeated. Nights blurred. He wrote letters he never sent, drafts of apologies he could not finish because each one sounded like a plea for himself. He told a chaplain that he hadn't known how to say no. The chaplain nodded. Knowing how is not the same as doing. The supervisor's appeals moved slowly, as appeals do. His garden flourished. Neighbors commented on the tomatoes. He smiled and accepted praise that tasted like ash. At night, he dreamed of doors that sealed themselves, of checkboxes filling in without his hand touching them. He woke before dawn and sat with the light off, listening to the distant trains, counting seconds he had never counted before. In the neighborhood, a new generation passed through the alley without knowing its story. The vending machine took cards now. The sidewalk had been resurfaced. The smell of damp concrete was gone. But some residents still crossed the street there, unconsciously, adrift in their path they could not explain. Trauma, like water, follows the easiest route. A documentary aired months later, careful and restrained. It avoided reenactments. It let documents speak. Viewers praised its balance. Ratings were modest. The city watched itself on screen and felt briefly seen, then moved on. Being seen is not the same as being changed. On a rainy evening, the analyst received an email from a colleague in another prefecture, a casual note attached to a dataset he might find interesting. Similar anomalies. Different corridor. Different year. The same 42-second shadow under a train. The analyst stared at the screen until the rain stopped and started again. He forwarded the email to a private folder and did nothing. Doing nothing is also a decision. He would tell himself later that he was waiting for permission. The family visited the water again, quietly together. They spoke her name out loud, not for the cameras, not for the city, but for themselves. Names are anchors. They keep people from drifting into symbols. When they left, they did not look back. At headquarters, a plaque was installed commemorating the resolution of the case. The wording was careful. The date ranged long. Officers passed it daily, rarely stopping. Plaques are for visitors. Those who live with the work do not need reminders, they carry them. Late one night, a maintenance crew reported a strange echo beneath a different overpass, a sound that lingered after trains passed. It turned out to be nothing, a loose panel, easily fixed. The report was filed. The echo disappeared. Everyone slept better. Nothing had happened. That was the point. The city learned to narrate the case as a success with caveats, a tragedy mitigated by eventual accountability. It was a story that fit. It left room for pride and sorrow in equal measure. Stories that fit are comforting. They closed doors. But under the trains, under the corridors that still existed, because cities never erase themselves completely, the math remained. 42 seconds. Enough time to miss something important. Enough time to decide not to ask. Enough time to trust that someone else is listening. The cold case had changed shape, from mystery to lesson, from lesson to cautionary tale. And like all cautionary tales, it risked being told too cleanly, sanded smooth by repetition. The danger was not forgetting what happened. The danger was believing it couldn't happen again. As the lights dimmed across the city, and the last trains ran their routes, the sound under steel and concrete folded back into the night. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Waiting. The waiting became the story no one wanted to tell. Not the kind that announces itself with sirens or signatures, but the quiet suspension that settles after everything important has already happened and nothing feels finished. The city moved with practiced efficiency, yet something in its rhythm had shifted, a fraction offbeat, as if everyone were counting without realizing it, measuring gaps between sounds, between responsibilities, between what was noticed and what was allowed to pass. In a conference room lit by screens instead of windows, the analyst finally shared the folder he'd kept to himself. He didn't frame it as an accusation. He framed it as curiosity. Patterns don't demand belief, they demand attention. The room leaned forward. The data from other prefectures overlaid cleanly, too cleanly to be coincidence, a family resemblance of anomalies clustered beneath transit lines during maintenance windows. Each instance had an explanation on paper. Each explanation made sense. Together, they made something else. Command staff debated scope. Jurisdiction is a language all its own, and it is fluent in delay. A task force was proposed, then renamed, then limited. Resources were allocated carefully, then trimmed. The decision landed where such decisions often do. Investigate quietly, avoid panic, control the narrative. Control is a comforting word. Investigators reached out to counterparts who remembered old cases as impressions rather than files. Accidents, misplacements, incidents without intent. They compared notes the way musicians compare scales, listening for dissonance. They found it. Not everywhere. Not always. Enough. The ghost worker heard rumors inside. Prisons are efficient at transmitting fear. He wrote another letter, this one addressed to no one, describing routes and names he had avoided before, drawing maps from memory with a pencil too short to hold comfortably. He stopped when the pencil broke. He stared at the broken point and felt relief. Broken things cannot be used again. The supervisor's appeal was denied quietly. He accepted it with a nod and went back to his garden. The weeds returned faster that year. He pulled them anyway, hands in the dirt, grounding himself in something that responded honestly to effort. Soil does not lie. It just waits. The woman's evaluations concluded with language that softened edges without dulling facts. Responsibility was discussed without assigning it. She listened to the conclusions read aloud and asked if anyone would remember her name. The doctor said yes. The answer was kind and incomplete. Names endure differently. A new memorial appeared near the water, unofficial and temporary, assembled overnight by hands that did not ask permission. It included ribbons, small stones, folded paper boats. Someone had written 42 on one of them, circled twice. No explanation. Those who knew, knew. The city issued updated guidelines. Noise assessments. Redundant logging. Independent sign-offs. The documents were thorough. The training sessions well attended. People nodded at the right moments. Learning, when mandated, often looks like compliance. Whether it becomes instinct is a longer question. Late one evening, the analyst rode the last train, standing beneath a hand strap that squeaked softly with each sway. At a familiar overpass, he stepped off and listened. The echo was there, then gone, then there again, subtle, almost musical. He recorded it on his phone, labeled the file with a date, and sent it to the task force inbox. He did not expect a reply. He did not need one. Sending it was the point. The reply came anyway, brief and cautious. Received. Logged. Logged. The word sat heavy. Logs are where things go to rest. At home, the analyst dreamed of arrows on a wall, of lines connecting stars that only appeared when you stopped looking directly at them. He woke before dawn and could not remember why his heart was racing. He made coffee and watched the light change, counting seconds between passing trains he could not hear. In the neighborhood, a child asked why adults sometimes cross the street for no reason. The answer came easily and said nothing. Children accept such answers. Later, they learn to hear what isn't said. A journalist pitched a follow-up piece about systemic tolerance. Editors hesitated. Fatigue metrics were down. Readers preferred resolution. The pitch was softened, reframed as a reflection, then shelved. Timing matters. Timing is everything. On the anniversary, the family returned to the alley alone. No flowers this time. Just a pause. They stood where the bag had once been, where the story had been simplified for years because simplicity was bearable. They listened. The hum. The city. The sound under the train. They left without ceremony. The task force met once more, then again, then less often. Leads were chased and gently set down. Budgets closed. Personnel rotated. The folder thickened. Thick folders suggest progress. Sometimes they are just weight. The cold case had taught the city how to speak about itself, how to admit failure without naming too many names, how to mourn without stopping. It had taught people to count seconds they used to ignore. It had taught systems to promise vigilance. Promises are easy. Vigilance is not. As winter edged towards spring, the sound under steel and concrete returned to being just sound, background to lives in motion. But for those who had learned to listen, it carried a different timbre now, a reminder etched into routine. That 42 seconds is never empty, that what fills it depends on who is paying attention, and that waiting, quiet, procedural, reasonable waiting, can be the most dangerous act of all. The waiting did not end. It thinned, stretched, and learned how to pass for normal. That is how cities survive, by teaching themselves which alarms to hear and which to fold into the background hum. The task force never announced an end date. It simply met less, then quietly stopped. Files were migrated. Folders renamed. The work did not disappear. It changed rooms. On a grey morning, the analyst walked the corridor one last time. Not officially, not recorded. He stood beneath the overpass and listened without counting. The sound was there, as it always had been, but it no longer startled him. Familiarity is a trick. It feels like safety. He turned and left, telling himself that attention had done its job, that systems had learned. He told himself many things. The city kept its promises in pieces. New checklists lived in binders. New cameras blinked awake. New training slides emphasized redundancy and accountability. These were improvements, measurable and sincere. They were also late. The gap between improvement and prevention is where stories are born. In a facility ringed by trees, the woman spent her afternoons in a common room with a window that faced the tracks. She no longer counted aloud. The numbers came anyway, internal, automatic like breathing. When asked what she remembered, she spoke less of events and more of sounds. The vending machine, the echo, the way the city swallowed moments whole. Memory, stripped of sequence, became atmosphere. The staff wrote careful notes. The ghost worker learned to sleep through trains. In dreams, crates became rooms. Rooms became corridors. Corridors opened onto daylight he could never quite reach. He woke with the sense that something essential had been misplaced, and that it was too late to file a report. The supervisor's garden went dormant with the season. He covered the beds and waited for spring, hands clean, nails trimmed, a man who had learned that care taken too late looks identical to neglect. At the water, the memorial was gone. Not removed, absorbed. Stones returned to the shore. Paper dissolved. Ribbons drifted until they weren't ribbons anymore. This, too, is how cities survive, by letting meaning leach into places where it cannot be contained. Years passed the way they always do, unevenly. A new case captured attention, then another. The old one became shorthand, then reference, then footnote. Students studied it without smelling the concrete. Journalists cited it without hearing the hum. Officers told rookies about it as a warning, not a wound. And yet, on certain nights, when maintenance windows align and trains run late, the sound under steel and concrete carries farther than it should. It lingers just long enough to be noticed by someone who wasn't looking for it. A pause. A hesitation. A glance down a corridor left open a second longer than policy requires. That is where the story truly ends. Not with a verdict, not with a confession that holds, not with a sentence that balances a scale, but with a choice, small and repeatable, made in ordinary time. To listen. To ask. To refuse the comfort of assuming someone else is responsible. The cold case warmed, revealed its truths, and cooled again, leaving behind a city altered in ways no plaque can capture. It taught that 42 seconds is never empty. It taught that systems do not fail loudly, they fail politely. It taught that waiting can be an action, and often the most consequential one. Under the trains, the city keeps moving. Above them, life continues. Between the two, in the spaces designed to be overlooked, the lesson remains, quiet, persistent, and unforgiving, that what was lost did not vanish. It was allowed to pass. And what happens next will always depend on who is listening when the sound comes back. The sound did come back, but not as a warning. It returned disguised as routine, folded neatly into a report no one read aloud. A maintenance crew logged a minor anomaly beneath a newly renovated overpass on the city's western edge. Vibration irregular, echo lingering half a second longer than expected. The note was tagged non-urgent, routed to a queue that existed to keep urgent things from piling up. The queue did its job. A junior engineer noticed the entry days later, not because it mattered, but because the phrasing felt familiar. He had grown up hearing the story without knowing he had heard it, absorbing fragments at dinner tables and on late trains, a cold case that had become part of the city's accent. He flagged the report with a question mark and moved on. Question marks are promises people make to themselves. Across town, a new hire at the transit authority attended her first overnight shift. She learned how to listen to machines, how to tell the difference between noise and signal, how to trust dashboards that simplified the world into colors. Green meant go. Yellow meant watch. Red meant act. The anomaly registered as yellow for a moment, then faded to green. She exhaled and wrote it off. Trust is efficient. The analyst, older now, read about the renovation in a trade bulletin and felt a familiar tightening. He told himself he was projecting. He told himself patterns are everywhere if you look hard enough. He closed the tab and went for a walk, choosing a route that did not pass beneath trains. Avoidance is a kind of listening too. In the facility, the woman sat with a puzzle missing a piece. She turned shapes in her hands, fitting and unfitting them, the motion soothing. When the piece failed to appear, she shrugged and moved on. Incompleteness had become a skill. The ghost worker marked another year by scratching a line into a notebook he was allowed to keep. He had learned to measure time differently, not by dates, but by what hurt less. The trains no longer woke him. Silence did. At the water's edge, someone tied a ribbon without knowing why. It was blue, not the right shade, not the right year. It fluttered anyway. Meaning does not ask permission. The engineer's question mark generated an automated response weeks later. Reviewed. No action required. The system worked as designed. Design is intent made durable. Construction finished ahead of schedule. The overpass opened with a brief ceremony and a ribbon cut cleanly. Traffic flowed. The city approved itself. Beneath the concrete, the space did what it had always done. It waited. One night, a train ran late. The sound lingered. A passerby slowed, head tilting, listening without knowing what he was listening for. He took out his phone, recorded a few seconds, and smiled at nothing in particular. The moment passed. He walked on. Somewhere between logging and living, between listening and hearing, the lesson hovered. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just present. That what matters rarely announces itself. That 42 seconds can still be filled. That systems, improved and earnest, are only as vigilant as the people inside them at the moment a small decision is made. The cold case did not reopen. It did not need to. It had already done its work, threading itself into habit and hesitation, into the half-second where someone might choose to ask one more question or let the green light hold. Under steel and concrete, the city breathed. Above it, life continued. And in the spaces between, the story waited. Not for another tragedy, but for another choice, quiet, ordinary, and decisive enough to matter. The choice came without ceremony, the way most important things do. A night supervisor, filling in for someone who called out sick, paused longer than policy required over a dashboard that flickered between green and yellow. He had not grown up with the story, had not learned to count seconds, but he had learned something else, how it felt when silence pressed back. He clicked into the raw feed, bypassing the summary, letting the noise speak for itself. The echo was subtle, a smear rather than a spike. Easy to dismiss. He listened again, and felt the smallest resistance form in his chest, the kind that precedes a question. He wrote a note, not elegant, not comprehensive, just honest. Lingering echo beneath Western Overpass. Doesn't match baseline. Request eyes on site. He sent it before he could talk himself out of it. Sending, again, was the point. A maintenance crew rolled out before dawn, grumbling, undercaffeinated, irritated at the interruption. They lifted a panel they weren't scheduled to lift, and found a cavity that shouldn't have been there. Air trapped where concrete was supposed to seal. Nothing dramatic. No remains. No crate. Just space. Unauthorized space. Space that had learned how to hide. Photos were taken. Measurements logged. A second report followed, then a third. The queue stirred. The word non-urgent was replaced by another word that changes posture. Investigate. People stood a little straighter. Voices lowered. Phones came out of pockets. The analyst heard through back channels and closed his eyes, not in triumph, but in relief. He did not rush to claim credit. He sent a single message to a small list. Look closely. Don't assume. It was enough. The facility staff noticed the woman sleeping through the afternoon train for the first time in years. Her breathing slowed. The numbers did not come. Something in her had released its grip, not because justice had arrived, but because attention had. In the prison library, the ghost worker read a short article about an inspection prompted by a routine anomaly. He folded the paper neatly and placed it back on the rack. He did not pray. He did not smile. He simply sat with the knowledge that the world had learned, a little, how not to repeat him. The supervisor tended his garden and felt the soil give more easily than before. He wondered, briefly, whether care could travel backward. He decided it could not. and that decision hurt less than hope. The investigation that followed was smaller, quieter, and more effective. No press conference. No promises. Just doors opened that stayed open, logs checked against reality, shortcuts removed one by one. It did not uncover another tragedy. It did something rarer. It interrupted a habit. Months later, the overpass was reinforced properly. The cavity filled. The echo vanished. The report closed with language that did not congratulate itself. Resolved. Resolution, in this case, meant prevention. The city did not notice. That was the point. At the alley, someone replaced the laminated photo that had long since curled. No note. No explanation. Just a clean image, eyes steady, smile polite, returned to the place where her name had learned to echo. A passerby paused, bowed slightly, and continued on. Under the trains, sound returned to sound. Above them, life kept moving. Between the two, in the thin space where attention decides what matters, the story finally loosened its grip. Not because it was finished, but because it had been heard. And that, in the end, was enough to change what came next. The city did not mark the change with a date. It rarely does. Change arrived as a series of small absences. The absence of an echo, the absence of a report tagged non-urgent, the absence of that faint tightening in the chest when a sound lingered too long. Absences are harder to celebrate. They look like nothing. They feel like luck. Under the reinforced overpass, concrete cured slowly this time. Inspectors returned twice, then a third time, because someone insisted on redundancy, and no one argued back. The habit had been interrupted, and interruption, once learned, has momentum of its own. The cue adjusted. Yellow stayed yellow a little longer. Green hesitated before turning green. The dashboards did not change, the people did. The analyst stopped walking corridors at night. He noticed the absence immediately, the way you notice a tooth with your tongue after it's gone. He slept better. Worse too. Dreams replaced vigilance, and in them he stood in rooms that finally had doors. He woke without counting. The woman was moved to a quieter wing, closer to a garden where trains could not be heard at all. On afternoons when the light angled just right, she sat with a book she never finished and felt something like stillness. When asked what she remembered now, she said less. When asked what she felt, she said air. The staff wrote it down and underlined it once. The ghost worker learned the names of birds that nested near the yard. He learned their schedules, the way he once learned routes. He found comfort in predictability that did not depend on silence. When a train passed in the distance, he noticed it the way one notices whether, real, external, no longer inside his chest. The supervisor's garden bloomed unevenly. Some beds thrived. Others refused. He stopped forcing them. Care, he learned, was not a transaction. It was attention without guarantee. In a training room, new hires watched a slide that showed an innocuous graph and a note beneath it. When in doubt, listen longer. No names. No case numbers. Just a principle. Someone asked why. The instructor paused, then said, "Because time is not empty." The room nodded, not fully understanding, which was fine. A journalist tried again to pitch the story, this time about prevention. The editor said yes to a short piece, buried below the fold. It ran without comment. That was also fine. At the water's edge, the ribbon that had been tied without knowing why finally frayed and let go. It drifted until it wasn't a ribbon anymore. The tide took it. Nothing asked to be remembered there. Nothing needed to be. On the anniversary, no one gathered. The city did not forget. It simply did not perform remembrance. Memory settled into routine, where it does its quietest work. Late one night, a train ran exactly on time. The sound passed and did not linger. A passerby did not slow. Somewhere, a dashboard stayed yellow for an extra heartbeat, then turned green with confidence earned rather than assumed. This is how the story ended. Not with a final reveal or a voice lowered for emphasis, but with continuity restored on better terms. With systems that still failed sometimes, but failed less politely. With people who learned that listening is not a phase, but a posture. Under steel and concrete, the city breathed without counting. Above it, life continued without noticing the absence that made it safer. And in the spaces between, where attention once slipped, there was now just enough friction to stop something terrible from passing through unnoticed. The cold case did not close the past. It changed the future in increments too small to film, too quiet to headline, and too important to ignore. And somewhere, beneath a sound that no longer hid anything, the city kept moving, aware, not absolved, but listening. The number didn't matter anymore. Parts had dissolved into one another the way nights do when you stop marking them. What remained was tone, residue, the aftertaste of attention. The city had learned to live in that register, low and steady, neither alarmed nor asleep. A late audit surfaced a line item no one recognized, a relic from a pilot program funded briefly and forgotten properly. The discovery did not cause a stir. It caused a pause. The pause mattered. Someone asked what it was for. Someone else answered honestly. They weren't sure. Uncertainty used to be a reason to move on. Now it was a reason to look. They opened a cabinet that had not been opened in years and found old sensors, obsolete and dusted over, still capable of telling a story if you listened closely enough. They powered one on out of curiosity. It worked. Curiosity is a muscle. It strengthens quickly once exercised. Across the city, inspections began to overlap in ways they never had before. Not because of a mandate, but because people remembered how it felt when overlap was missing. Two sets of eyes on the same space. Two signatures that meant two moments of thought. Redundancy stopped being an inconvenience and started being a relief. The analyst watched from a distance now, no longer central, no longer needed. That too was a success. He felt something like grief for the vigilance that had once defined him, then something like pride that it wasn't required. He kept the old folder anyway. Some things are not thrown away. They are kept as ballast. In the quiet wing, the woman stopped watching trains altogether. The television stayed off. She took to sitting with her hands in her lap, feeling the weight of them, grounding herself in something that did not move. When asked what she thought about, she said, "I don't count anymore." The room exhaled. The ghost worker was transferred to a facility closer to his family. The move was bureaucratic, unremarkable. On the ride, he passed beneath an overpass and noticed nothing. The noticing would come later, in smaller ways, in choices he did not yet know he would make. The supervisor sold his house and downsized. He gave away his tools. The garden went to someone else. Letting go felt less like punishment than honesty. He learned to walk the neighborhood without scanning for weeds. A new class of recruits toured the transit control center. The guide spoke about throughput and safety, about efficiency balanced with care. He did not tell the story. He didn't have to. The room had learned a language where the story lived between the words. On a cold morning, frost outlined the edges of concrete beneath the overpass. It made the lines visible, the seams where things had been joined and sealed. A maintenance worker ran a gloved hand along the surface and felt the difference where the repair had been done right. He nodded to himself and moved on. No report was filed. None was needed. The city's soundscape shifted subtly. Not quieter, clearer. The difference between noise and signal grew easier to hear. People still missed things. They always would. But missing was no longer automatic. It had to be chosen. At the alley, the photograph remained clean. Someone wiped it when it rained. Someone else replaced the tape when it loosened. No one argued about whether it should be there. It simply was. Years layered themselves gently. The case became a footnote, then a citation, then a habit disguised as common sense. That is how the best lessons survive, by ceasing to announce themselves. Under steel and concrete, the city kept breathing. Above it, life kept moving. Between the two, attention held just enough, just long enough, to change the math. 42 seconds did not disappear. They were reclaimed, filled with listening, with asking, with the quiet refusal to let routine decide what mattered. And if one night the sound returned, as sounds sometimes do, it would not arrive alone. It would meet a pause, a question, a hand reaching for the raw feed instead of the summary. Not an ending, not a beginning, just a city, finally practiced at the space in between. The space in between grew familiar, and familiarity did not dull it. It sharpened it, the way a well-used blade learns exactly where to cut and where to stop. The city no longer mistook smoothness for safety. It had learned that friction was not failure, it was feedback. A small incident tested that learning. A delivery truck stalled beneath an overpass during a maintenance window, engine coughing, hazard lights blinking out of sync. The sound pooled strangely, not loud, not alarming, just wrong. A passerby slowed. A technician glanced up from a screen. Two people noticed at once. That had never mattered before. This time it did. Protocol unfolded without drama. A call placed. A lane closed. A check performed. Nothing was found. Nothing needed to be. The moment passed, recorded only as a line in a log that would not be buried under urgency. Prevention is anticlimactic. It looks like embarrassment when you're wrong. The city accepted that cost. The analyst received a short message months later, forwarded from someone he did not know. Thanks for the habit. He read it twice and did not reply. Gratitude, like vigilance, works best when it doesn't linger. In the quiet wing, the woman began to draw. Not scenes. Shapes. Corridors without ends. Doors that opened onto light. The staff pinned one drawing to a board and forgot to take it down. It stayed. The ghost worker taught another inmate how to listen for birds. He did not explain why it mattered. He just listened with him until the difference became clear. Teaching, he learned, was another way of naming responsibility. The supervisor volunteered at a community garden far from transit lines. He asked questions before planting. He waited for answers. Waiting felt different now. Active chosen. A new generation grew up with the habits baked in. They double-checked, because that's how things were done. They asked why and received answers that did not reference disasters, only principles. Time is not empty. Noise can be cover. Attention saves effort later. Simple ideas. Expensive to learn. At the alley, the photograph aged again. Someone replaced it without ceremony. The vending machine hummed a little lower than the old one. The streetlight no longer flickered. Maintenance had fixed that years ago. On a clear night, the last train passed exactly on time. The sound moved through steel and concrete and kept going, unremarkable. No one counted. Someone listened anyway. This is how the story thinned into life. Not erased, not resolved, but distributed across thousands of small choices that rarely felt heroic. The cold case did not ask to be remembered forever. It asked to be practiced. And in that practice, the city found a quieter strength. Not certainty. Not absolution. Just the steady knowledge that when something lingered where it shouldn't, someone would notice, someone would ask, and the space between sound and silence would no longer belong to chance.